Well, hey everyone, welcome back to episode 4 of the podcast Holy Youth Ministry, where we look at youth ministry from a variety of perspectives. And today we have an extra special, very special guest in today, our very own senior pastor, Jamie Walton.
You must have ran out of guests, I guess, already.
Something, yeah. Well, we're at the very bottom of the invitee list, and I figured, since I work here, I might as well. Like, oh yeah, Jamie, you can talk about something.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll give my shot.
But yeah, you've been working with teenagers for what, 20 some odd years now?
Almost 25.
Yeah.
I Heather and I, my wife and I, got asked to be youth leaders in our early 20s it was probably around 99, 2000. So it's right in that. And so we were just volunteers up until 2004, and then I got hired basically what you do a long time ago to do youth ministry and young adult ministry for like 3 years.
Yeah, we just work on Sunday nights and eat pizza.
Yeah,
right? And
it's great. That's games, dodgeball. Yeah. I mean, I had a lot of concussions from getting hit with.
Dude, I haven't played dodgeball yet with our kids. I'm kind of nervous too.
For me, it wasn't even playing dodgeball. At least I was ready. It was walking across the gym every single night. A ball would just hit me in the head. I'm like, what is wrong? Even if there was only 4 kids, which early on, that was all it was. And then I took when I became the lead pastor in 2007, I was still kind of transitioned. So I was like doing youth ministry, but I kind of transitioned out of it. But then I kind of came back in when my kids, not really to lead it or anything. We had good youth leaders, but I just hung out with the teenagers once my son and then my daughter were involved. And so having 2 teenagers, and so there was some years but and then right up until we hired you, I kind of had to lead it for a year because some of our key leaders were like, no, I'm not doing this. So
it's almost like it's a little difficult and challenging. Yeah. Although to your credit, you are a senior pastor who loves and values teenagers.
Yeah, it's my favorite. I love all of our kids, but I think teenage, they've always been my favorite.
Your niche, your desire.
I've always enjoyed.
It's hard to be a teenager.
Yeah, it's really
even
hard.
Though you being as old as you are, I'm sure you know.
Yeah,
you were a teenager. What in the 80s?
It's funny because I think I was born in 75, so like late 80s and early 90s. Back in the day, baby. But I think,
did you have one of those soul patches when you first started, like right here, like every 90s youth pastor, like right here?
No, because I started late 90s, and I never was even plugged into like what other youth people were doing. Yeah. I was just me, and that's kind of crazy. I think as you get older, what you have to realize is stop trying to be cool, right? Like I'm not, because it almost looks dumb if you're trying to dress like a teenager when you're almost 50.
Oh, it's terrible.
But I think if you do still mess around with kids and show love to them, they almost appreciate it more because most don't when they're that age, except for some of their teachers. And those are the teachers they like the best, right? The ones that actually just care about them.
Well, that's actually one of my recruiting pitches. Not that we're talking about that tonight, but say, hey, like, you're never too old for youth ministry. If you love teenagers and you want to listen to them and you want to show up and give them time, then you were made for youth ministry. So it doesn't matter what age you are.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think people get scared by teenagers. It's just like
they're a lot easier than they let on.
Yeah.
They're like New England people, like you got to earn that right to be heard, right? They look at you.
That's why it was never a problem for me. Okay, you're normal.
But today we're going to be talking about teenage busyness. We're going to talk a little bit about sports. We're going to talk about the overscheduling of today's teenagers. A little bit probably going into then the subsequent anxiety, even sleep deprivation, exhaustion that our teenagers are facing. But I wanted to start with, you've been working with teenagers about 20 years. Yep. What's the biggest difference you see in them now as compared to when you started?
Well, there's really, when it comes to just being a teenager, there's just like almost no difference there's differences as far as like our topic. Yes. And I'll get to that. But overall, that's the funny thing. It's like, I think of some of the kids who were teenagers when I started and now they're your age or older, 40 even. And they got kids and I still see some of them are in our church or around our church. But it's just like, I still think of them that way, that like the way they process things, the way they screwed things up a lot, the way that the mess, nothing really has changed, right? Like nothing. They still are awkward, especially early on. Teenage or junior high girls are like you can put a gun to my head. I'm not going to share anything personal. Sure. Senior high girls are awesome. It's like they have this huge, boys just kind of go, they mature a little bit, and you need to be about like 30 before they start knowing what they're doing. But I think
Preach.
The biggest, and it's just so obvious, but it's true, is the connectivity. When I remember when I started, there was still no phones. We didn't have, there was cell phones, but kids didn't have those. And I remember the first thing, and this was when I was on staff, so it was around then, was AIM, AOL Instant Messenger.
Oh yeah, did you have a screen name?
I did.
Do you remember? I remember my screen name. Do you remember your screen name?
I think it was just I was a pastor, so I think I tried to keep it pretty.
Mine was Soccer Boy 5903. Yeah. And true story, on AIM, I actually got broken up with in the 8th grade through an away message.
See?
My therapist says I'm making progress.
Well, you think about it, like that should have told us right there. This is good. We need to figure this out now. Right? It's kind of like, not to derail us, but AI.
Oh yeah.
Right now. Like, you kind of like, this is probably going to go bad. But let's keep going with it. Like, no, it's going to go bad.
Yeah.
Maybe we should but anyway, it's a whole nother thing. But I think with AIM, that was the first time, because like when I first was involved with teenagers, it was like I would email them.
Yep.
Like that was like emailing back and forth. And so now we have AIM, and it was like I could log on. It was a computer. You didn't have phones, smartphones, and actually talk to them real time. And I remember thinking, well, this brings up some really cool ways of connecting, but then it also brings up, is this appropriate? And like, all that, right? And things we were trying to think through. And then there was message boards. And then I remember early on, a couple of the kids, I think at the Christian school, because it was really a college thing at this time, Facebook.
What about, did you have what about MySpace? Because
MySpace
predated Facebook.
It did. MySpace was, we had like 1 or 2 kids. I think one of them was Steve, who's back there doing the control room now. I had a band and they were on MySpace. Nice. And I remember checking that out and being like, "Ooh, these kids!" Like, but Steve, it was.
We're gonna have to talk about this afterwards.
But it wasn't much, MySpace was never a thing really for our kids, and it quickly grew into Facebook and all of that. So that's clearly the biggest difference as far as teenagers and what I think has impacted them and continues to impact them is how they communicate, how they're. It's not just. The being online, it's the connectivity piece that they don't let their brains shut down. They don't rest. They don't, and they're always, if you have a problem at school, you can't. I remember when I was that age, I could just go home, and it was still upsetting, right? A girl I liked, like, dissed me or something, and it was upsetting, but I would just get my basketball and go shoot hoops across the street at the park. Then I couldn't log on to a, Snapchat and see what everyone's saying about it, or look through TikTok and see like all these stories that make me feel sad. Like I didn't have any of that, So I think that's the
really
biggest,
good point. Yeah.
The biggest. When it comes to busyness, and we can break out whichever one you want, but when it comes to busyness, it was already happening when I started. Way more. Like if you were to say, what's the biggest difference between when I was a teenager in the like late 80s, early 90s, and now, that's definitely the big thing, right? Like we had sports. I played all the sports. I was on teams. I was on all-star teams. It was one season. You didn't travel very far.
Yeah.
You stayed within your community. It was your friends who played. And then you got to high school, obviously you played the seasons and you traveled around and all that. But there wasn't club teams, there wasn't But that was starting to be a thing for sure. It's just become way worse.
Yeah.
In my opinion. I mean, way more, some would say. I say way worse. Like it's like some of these kids are like just constantly
I've got that scheduled.
I saw a video. You've maybe seen this. It's kids, they're probably 10. 8 to 10 is my guess of their age.
Yeah.
And it was Mother's Day, which first of all, I just think, are you kidding me?
Playing soccer games on Mother's Day?
No, this was baseball. It doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
Like the point is they do. And it's like, what do you really think your mom wants to do this? It's like ridiculous. So the mothers, which was kind of a funny video, they changed their walk-up music. All right. So they were changing into like,
wait, kids,
if I could love you.
That would have been my dream, by the way. Like when I was that age,
Have
man, I
walk-up?
wanted walk-up music because that was like the year of like I grew up playing baseball during Nomar Garcia Parra, and I did all
Yeah.
that.
And that's my point.
I wanted
It's like 10-year-olds have these amazing uniforms and walk-up music.
Dude.
And I'm like, and in a way it's cool, but in a way it's like, what are we doing? You're 10. You don't deserve walk-up music. You stink. Go into the sandlot and play tennis ball like I did, you know? So I'm a little bitter, but like it was a funny video and all that, but it was just reminded me of like there is no, you drive by the parks, unless it's a formalized game, they're not there.
Well, and the interesting thing too,
At least
is,
in the suburbs.
Sure.
The cities, they probably still are. I'm less familiar with that.
Well, that's interesting too. Almost, it's like we are putting this professionalism on 10-year-olds.
Yeah, right. Makes them think that they could do that.
It makes them think that way, and then they get into that mentality,
Yeah.
and then you add an overscheduling mindset to that of not only do you have games all weekend, and again, I don't. We have a few students who play baseball, but they play Babe Ruth. They don't play travel. But I remember being in Colorado, and I had students who, I mean, they were traveling to Florida, they were traveling to Texas, they were going down to Arizona, right? For these.
Oh yeah, it's and they do. Hockey does that now. And soccer does that big time. We've had some good soccer players in our church who they were traveling to tournaments, Maryland, Virginia, kind of regularly during the season. It wasn't all year long, but there would be certain seasons. And so it's, again, I'm not bad mouthing, like it's never okay. I think in general, what has happened, the worst thing that's happened with the sports anyway, is that it's all year long.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if your kid loves it and he's good, as a parent, you're like, okay, I don't want to kill my kid with all this business. But if he doesn't do this, that's he's going to fall behind and he doesn't want to. I mean, if the kid doesn't want to play, then don't make him do it. But if he's like, I love baseball, I love hockey, or I love, and all these other kids are doing, he's really successful, it's hard not to be like, well, let's keep going.
Yeah.
I've seen kids at senior year level, great. Like I remember this one kid in Uxbridge, and he was a really good soccer player growing up. He played club and all that. He quit and he played football. And I don't even think I don't know if he was good or not. He was a good athlete, so maybe he was. But the point was, I think he just got sick of it.
Sure.
He's like, I'm tired of this game. I've been playing it forever.
And so again, as we jump into more, my question is, what's behind all of this, right? What's behind the sports schedules? And again, yes, we live in a very athletic community. But also I know students who are heavily involved in band, who are traveling. I know students who have traveled to
gymnastics is big.
Gymnastics,
that's a sport.
Gymnastics is fantastic.
I mean, we have a family, and I think they're an awesome family, but the figure skating, I've never even heard of it.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
shout out Talaminis.
Yeah, absolutely. But like, these are the things that I think, though, that to me, those types of things are the response to a market. It's money. Money drives it. And so there's people out there going, I can make money on this.
Yeah.
And now I see a culture where families are like, all right, where are we bringing our kid to next? It's like, well, what about the kids who might want to do figure skating? And it's fine. Like, I'm glad there's opportunities, but I think the mindset has grown. Here's the biggest thing. Kids aren't independent at all.
Yeah.
They're like completely like, the words play date were not a thing when I was a kid. Like, you called up your friend and you said, hey, want to hang out? And you went.
So I can't remember, again, I read so much in preparation for this, but I think that I saw that students used to 10 or 15 years ago, they would spend 2.89 nights just kind of out with friends a week.
Yep.
Now that number has reduced down to 1.7.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that is they're too busy.
Yeah.
Like, if you're involved in this, and this, and then it's like, well,
and we haven't even mentioned part-time jobs too for our older students, right? Who on top of, and we haven't even mentioned homework, which, again, as someone I love school, I have a master's degree, but also I kind of think homework, like, if you can't teach it.
Homework always seemed ridiculous to me.
But, sorry, for you teachers listening,
I think studying's important in research papers, because that's the thing you got to do out of class. Like, as you get into higher level high school and college, but yeah, like little kids, like I think there's certain things like flashcards, math, like certain things that you do need to have more repetition than they have time for. But then there's some that's just busy.
I was texting with a couple youth pastor friends of mine, and one of them, her kids did 25 pages of like homework on Memorial Day yesterday, and they're like in first grade.
First grade.
Come on. What are we doing? But again, so behind our teenagers, 7 out of 10 teenagers will say that they're overstimulated, they're exhausted, they're anxious.
Yeah. What I think behind it is two things: money and the adults.
Money.
Where's
so
the problem?
is it? So it is money and parenting.
Yes.
Okay. Tell me more.
It's parents. It's not just parents, but it's
Is it the
whole culture?
So I have written down here. Actually, I have written down 3 things.
Yeah.
I think that pride plays a role in terms
that's
of
the
wanting.
Thing. Like, okay, so I'm not taking the teenager out of it, or the kid even before they're teenagers, certainly before they're teens. Yes, they're to blame, but they're kids. Like,
yeah, they are.
We need to say nope, and they're like, but I want to. Too bad. There's a lot of things we need to say that, and yet, as a culture, as adults, we've gotten to the point now. It's again, and that's why I kind of mentioned the AI. There's going to come to a point where you can't live without it,
sure.
right? Like, and it's like you can't. Right now, you can't say to your teenager, you can't be on the internet because they wouldn't be able to function or have their life. So it's like it's so out of the cat's so out of the bag, and it's a lion that we almost have to now all right, react to it. What can we do to? But I think that's the problem are the adults where so many things come into play when it comes to not just sports, but any of these activities. It becomes the adults' parents' social scene.
Sure.
For a while, that's your friends because that's who you see.
Well, yeah.
You're going to practices, you're going weekend tournaments, you're going, right? So now they're hanging out, and so now it becomes a thing. The kids are friends. And there is good things with that. You still have friendships being formed and socializing and all of that. But I think the parents, it becomes so, it's not just my kid. I think my kid's going to be a professional. And
by the way, we were talking about this before the show. Jamie, do you remember the odds of your kid becoming a professional athlete?
Yeah, you said 0.00
0.0296% chance of your kid becoming a professional.
Yeah. So there's also the hope with some parents that they could go D1.
D1 get scholarships.
Major
sure.
help financially. But even that, I was talking, we have Danny Brown, who's now got his own kids. He played Harvard football. And his dad, Joel's a great guy. He comes to our church. And he told me once, he's like, I knew when he was 5. Not that he would go pro or anything. He's just different. You're born, you can work as hard as you want. There is a certain gifting to be at that level, even D1 college.
Yeah.
I think parents don't quite grasp. My kid's the best on the team. Yeah, in Uxbridge or Northbridge.
Yeah.
But is he or she elite?
Yeah.
And almost right away. And now you, as a parent, now you do have to make those decisions because there is a lot to be gained by being and you can do it well. I mean, the Hicks family, they moved down south recently, but Livy Hicks went major to University of Maryland to play soccer. She was an amazing kid, well-rounded. Their family's awesome. They made it happen with her still playing club and doing a lot of that because she was a phenomenal soccer player. So it can be done, right? But I think parents do sometimes think like that, but I don't think they think that far ahead. They just think my kid likes this. I like it.
And a lot of the research that I studied is parents are inadvertently exhausting their kids through this.
Yeah.
They're not trying to burn them out. And it's not even like a vicarious, like an intentional vicarious. I didn't get this, so I want to relive my former sports glory through my kid. There's a lot of just unintentional, inadvertent overscheduling of a teenager with good intentions.
Well, the problem now is this, especially with sports, and I think this is going to creep into other things too, but definitely sports, it's starting way sooner. If it only started when they were 16, I think they'd probably be okay because they have a foundation. They still could be exhausted, and that's not good. But they have a foundation at that point of learning how to play, learning how to be independent, learning how to, just rest because, they're in the formative years. But we're having second graders do this.
Yeah.
So they literally where do I need to be? And where, they got these bags with the bats sticking out. And I'm like thinking to myself, I don't know, when I played Little League, the coach brought a bunch of bats.
Yep.
You just used to one, And I'm sounding like the old guy that says, get off my lawn. But I think it's so early on that by the time they become high school, if you were to say, hey, stop doing it and rest, they would be like, and then they pick up their phone.
Exactly. Well, your identity, and that's an identity forming thing, and we can talk about the church, obviously, our identity in Christ, and then out of the overflow of that, you can be a Christ centered athlete, right?
Yeah.
All of those things. But you had mentioned too the prevalence of starting at younger and younger ages, and we're seeing more and more orthopedic injuries as a result.
Oh yeah,
the concussions.
they're injuries.
I mean, we talk about the baseball scene, the amount of kids blowing out their elbows at such a young age, and the prevalence
Soccer,
of surgeries.
we've seen a lot of like
ACLs.
Injuries. Yeah,
Oh
ACLs.
yeah.
You never saw that when I was a kid ever.
No.
Yeah, I mean, well, not ever, but it was very, very rare to see kids blow out their knee because your body is so much younger and healthier. If I go out there and try to do it right now, I'm going to blow up my knee, but not at 15, you know?
So now there's also research that goes to show that if your kid there's also the opposite effect, that students who don't have as much going on, who have a lot of downtime, who don't have a lot of scheduling, they are far more likely to get into dangerous situations, whether they be.
Now we talk. Obviously, we want to talk in general, but we've talked a lot about sports. And if anyone knows me, I'm a huge sports fan. It's my background, but I also have had a daughter who was not in sports at all and did other things, and so
incredible.
Great
theater.
in
She's
theater
awesome.
and all that. But I think part of it, we did have her do a little bit of like theater, but it was nothing big.
Yeah.
But like that's what I mean by like by the time she became really busy, she was like could handle it. She was, you know. But where was I going with that? I think. See, I went down a rabbit trail.
Well, so you here I was
me?
saying there's the opposite effect of the fear almost of being
so,
them needing something to do to prevent them from getting into trouble.
Exactly. So like if all of these other kids are so overprogrammed, now you get kid B who parents aren't really taking much of an interest. There's nothing really for them to do. I'm not saying there's nothing, but the productivity is like, well, everyone else is like going off to their club game, and and they don't really know. There's really no one to do that with, and also what the over like sports sizing of our kids has taken away, and this is for someone who thinks. I really value sports, whether you're a great athlete or not. The things it teaches the health of your body, the competitiveness, learn how to lose, you know? And we make fun of everybody gets a trophy, but even when you do that, the kids know they lost.
Yeah.
So you still learn how to lose. But it's completely taken away that whole segment of kid who's not going to, they know they're not a great athlete. They don't even really like it all that much. It's like, okay, but they're like, I don't want to play 17 times a week. I don't care enough.
Yeah.
But if it was one practice and a couple games, do it. And we still have some of that, but I think we're taking it out unless you're really serious. And so these kids are left now. Like when I was a kid, like a lot of these kids played. They weren't going to probably play in high school. They were just playing and having a good time with friends. And it was cool. So those kids there's a huge void of what do we do? And I think the community centers in town try hard to have things for them. So I think there are those things, but I think it is a lot less. And when you're bored, anybody, but especially at that age, you're gonna get in trouble.
Dumb stuff, yeah,
especially boys.
Well, and you'd mentioned too, right? All of the playing 17 times a week instead of one practice and a couple games. I think to a degree, right? This busyness is taking away from the joy and the fun of it.
Yeah. Right?
When we impose what almost seems like rigorous professional standards on these kids, remember they're teenagers. Their brains are developing, and they're still figuring out. They're asking the questions: Who am I? Why am I? Right?
Yeah.
And then we pigeonhole them into you're a baseball player, you're a soccer player, and this is all you do, right? I think that there's some even emotional stunting there.
Yeah.
That can come about as a result. So
I remember. When Nathan was my son, who's now 21, for reference, when he was a little kid, probably like 8 or 9, as I said, big sports guy. I was like, oh, he's probably gonna want it. But I didn't want to be that guy who was like, you're gonna play sports, you know. So he didn't really show a huge amount of interest. We'd play a little bit, but he loved like other things, and so we had him do karate. And then he was like, you know what, I think I want to play soccer. I was like, great, you know. Now he's starting to show an interest. He was like 9. And I thought, so that's like second grade or whatever. Like that's when I started, And so we signed them up. They were already categorizing the kids at levels. There was like 3 levels.
Gosh.
And we showed up
9 years old.
And Greg Masadi, one of the elders of our church, good friend, awesome guy. His oldest son was Nathan's age, so he was coaching in the town. And he's like, hey, you know what? You're late to sign up. It was like literally June, and this was for September. I'm like, I'm late to sign up. Like, what are we doing here? So I was like, oh, that stinks. He goes, yeah, you know what? I'll just take Nathan on my team. It's fine. But he was like the A team because like his kid was always Seth was a great soccer player, and so Nathan shows up. These kids are dribbling like with their left, right foot. They're doing and like he barely knew how to kick the ball. It was still an awesome time and a lot of fun. But I remember thinking like, what are we? This is weird to do this because again, now that takes the kid who got a late start to say, well, I stink. I'll never be as good as them. Or what would happen is the C team, these kids would play together and be like, I'm pretty good. And then, no, you're just not horrible. Like everybody you're playing against, But my point is, this was at like 8, 9.
Yeah.
And so that they become a teenager that you've already gotten rid of the kids who are more peripheral. It would just be a role player.
Yeah.
They're not even hitting puberty yet.
Yeah.
And that, like, you don't know. All of a sudden, a kid is used a growth spurt. It's just muscle, especially boys.
Yep.
Like, big time. Like, big things happen between, like, 13 and 15 for a boy. They grow 7 inches, and now suddenly, but if they never, ever were, like, introduced to it, it's a little too late, But I think it really is, like, all year in some cases.
It's exhausting.
But still, I think just in general, the busyness of programmed stuff, whatever it is a problem, and it's an adult problem. We have to fix it.
We as a society don't know how to say, and this is in my research too. I was saying that we as a society, we really don't know how to say no. Right? We'll say yes to everything, but the problem is that with every single yes we say, that's no to something else.
Yeah.
Right? And we in church world, like we jokingly shake our fists, but oftentimes, like the first thing to come off the table time-wise is church, right? Well, hey man, if my kid is, and look, we believe very strongly in going to church. Does going to church make you a Christian? No. But also being there, I see it as like, re-upping in the armory for the week, putting on my armor of God and having my sword sharpened to go back and do battle the other 6 days.
Well, I agree with you. We're not, at least when I talk about church, it's not just church attendance. It's involvement and plugging in. So for my 2 kids, it wasn't just, are you going to church? They were going to church. And fortunately, neither of them were really clubs, all that. And both of them went to the Christian school, which they've always maintained this standard of nothing on Sunday.
Yeah.
It's a good standard. And so we've never really had to battle with that. But I always, Heather and I also prioritized, you're going to do, which was called Awana, now called Bright. It's Wednesday nights.
Yep.
You're going to go to VBS.
Yep.
You're going to, there's other things that you could be a part of. And then youth ministry, you're going to be a part of that. Sunday night, there's no reason why you can't do it. And because it's not just about attending church. In fact, some of that other stuff's more important for them, right? To really get teaching that's at their level. But if you don't prioritize it, they're going to see it.
And that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Is what is important to us as parents largely trickles down. You had said it earlier, teenagers aren't really that independent.
Right.
Largely their schedules are structured by us.
Right.
And so if it's not important to us, it won't be important to them.
This has been an issue
forever. It's a human issue.
Yeah, because like when I remember when I was doing youth ministry, we'd have parents, they would like, so-and-so won't be a youth group. And I'm like, why? Well, you got in trouble. We're grounding him. I'm like,
from church?
Yeah, from youth group. He likes being there. I'm like, yeah, well, he
should like
we're not, here. This isn't football. Like, we're talking about God, But it's like parents just not thinking sometimes.
I'm grounding you from Jesus.
Oh, it's one of my biggest pet peeves. It happened, it wasn't like all the time, but it happened enough where it was like, I would say to the other youth leaders, like, what are we doing? Ground them from everything else, but not
I know one. I know a youth pastor, shout out Kyle Friedman. He's down in Virginia at Hope Church. And I remember like his oldest daughter, she's such a great kid. Yeah. Right. But when she would get in trouble, but she was such a great student that she would do work weeks ahead of time. And he would ground her from doing work. Could you imagine being that parent? Like, no, you are not allowed to work on next week's homework. Could you imagine that? Sorry, you said that, like grounding from youth group. And then it reminded me of Kyle, like grounding his kid from
But it brings up a good point, is he's seeing in his own child, like, you know what she needs is to take a break from that.
Yeah,
because
and
everything, even good things like sports or activities, drama, music, part-time jobs, these are all healthy, good things. We're not saying don't do them. But anything, including schoolwork, if it becomes an idol, you're almost worshiping it. And Kyle saw that and said, you know what? You need to lay your idol aside here. You're doing fine. We don't need to worry about your grades and do something else.
And so when we look at, sports again, by the way, I was a state champion in the mile, right? I could have gone D1. Whoop, whoop, yeah, show me up, whoop. No, yeah, you look at me now and you're like, you really?
I try not to look at you.
Parenting. Parenting. Right, but I mean, even then, I had a rigorous schedule. I ran every day, obviously. I had a part-time job. But all that work, even then I got to college and I was like, well, this is fun and I enjoy this, but, right, and I can't even begin to imagine, right? Like if I'd gone D1 and made it my life, like, I don't know, doesn't sound like...
Again, I do think the bigger problem starts earlier than teenage years. It just becomes really manifested then. But because I do think you can balance this. Like I said, the Hicks family that had Livy, and you can balance it. She was at youth group right up till she graduated most weeks. And I'm like, I would look at these other families. I'm like, you don't got a Livy. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This girl's going D1 full scholarship soccer, and she's here because her family said this is important.
And really, so what it comes down to too is, and I think we have to look at ourselves as parents, right, in the midst of the business, because I think oftentimes, like setting teenagers aside, we as a culture are too busy. Yeah. We say yes to too much. We try to do too much, and we're exhausted. And again, we're not having the things that we let go are, yes, we as pastors always gripe and groan about gripe.
Groan.
We don't
groan.
grope.
Some GR.
We gripe and groan about church attendance, but also like, what about family time around a table? Right. I mean, and even stillness, restfulness, because you look at teenagers today, they've got their extracurriculars on top of sports, on top of even part-time jobs for some of our older students. But Jamie, you mentioned it all the way back at the beginning that they're not even allowing their brains to rest, because rest for teenagers is all right. Well, now I'm going to go on my phone. Right. Yeah. I'm going to, and sitting on a couch scrolling. Sure. Your body is still, but your mind isn't.
It's pretty bad when you're like, happy, like with my kids, like if they're just sitting back and watching a show, they're like, oh, like remember back, like my parents would be like, TV's gonna rot your brain. Now I'm like, oh, that's great, because it's way like calmer than
well, sure, it's that quick hit, instant gratification, which, look, we have a church TikTok account. I lean into that. Like, I'm not upset about that, but here's the problem is we're busying kids, sports, extracurriculars, jobs, and then they're coming home, they're exhausted, right? It's 9:00 at night. They've still got homework, and then they feel like, but we haven't even let them be teenagers yet. Like, teenagers want to scroll on their phones, they want to do all that stuff, and so what's happening is they're eating quickly, not really spending time with family, getting their homework done. By then it's 11:00, and they got to be up early, but then they're not even sleeping because, like, man, I haven't even had any time for myself. So they're scrolling through TikTok, watching, actually YouTube is their favorite right now. We're watching YouTube videos till 1, 2 a.m. Then they're waking up at 6.
That brings up a really good, and I don't know, because you've been out of it for about a year, so I don't think much has changed. The amount of parents that have no filters, no blocks on the kids' devices. There's so many good products out there, and I do think we have to continually educate parents. They're just like, oh, it's like,
parents, do not give your kids unfiltered phones.
And it's not just about pornography.
It's about setting boundaries that kids themselves don't know how to set.
Off. Like, that's what I did with mine. And at a certain point at night, it's gone. You can't, and it's like, it's what adults should be doing, not just teenagers.
Well, we have to set that standard. Yeah. And I know a family that actually every single night, mom, dad, and the 2 daughters, phones are on the kitchen table at 9 a.m. p.m., 9 p.m. It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you need to have oversight. It's like anything else. Like, you can't, it's out of the box, but you can I waited a long time before I even let Nathan have data, like a
Yeah.
phone with it was all
Oh,
pretty much
Wi-Fi
only
based?
Wi-Fi,
Oh, that's cool.
and it was because when he was at home, I knew at the time my
Yeah.
Wi-Fi was completely filtered. You
Yep.
couldn't get porn. I was biggest worry for me was
Sure.
pornography, but especially for a boy. But
Well, you've got. What do you Bark?
once I let him have data, I used Bark.
Yeah, Bark.
I don't anymore. Verizon is a pretty good like filter for all.
Oh, really?
It's data and
That could be a conversation probably for another podcast.
Yeah,
I'm sure parents are going to want to hear about how to do all of this.
Definitely. That would because I got to the point with Nathan, he's now 21, where I just want to block him from pornography.
Yeah.
When he was a kid, though, I was interested. I could see with Bark any text messages from his friends.
Yep.
And there was some things where I'm like, what is going on here? Why are they calling you this? And
Yeah.
so,
Teenage boy stuff.
But the biggest thing is like the connectivity, like parents. And I would say this, like from all of this that we're talking about, that of course not every family is set up this way, but for those who are, it ultimately falls on dads. This is our job. It is not.
We have to do
it is our job.
Standards.
Yeah, when you see the statistics, when dad just attends church, it doesn't even have to be like super Christian, just attends church, his kids are 80% likely to continue.
Wow.
If it's just mom, it's 20. And it's just why mom was faithful. It's not against moms. It's not like because women aren't important. Moms aren't important. They are. When it comes to setting a tone of a household and leading, it is what God designed us to do. Yeah. I know that, the kicker Butker just got in trouble for essentially saying this. Thankfully, I'm not as famous. Because all he was saying, he wasn't saying women shouldn't achieve it and go get jobs. Absolutely. My wife's a nurse and she's worked our whole adult life. And thank God she at times was making more money than me. And I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
But the point is, we as fathers, we have to set the tone. Yep. If dad says, then it doesn't matter what mom says. And mom's caught in between because mom wants to nurture and wants to, and so we're the ones that needs to step up and just say, here's the thing, you're going to have a phone, but here's what's going to happen. And here's what's not going to happen. But I don't, my friend, blah, blah, blah. It's the same thing when they say that I don't want to eat vegetables. Too bad. And we've kind of thrown that out the window too. Just eat Dino Bites your whole childhood and see how that goes.
Well, it's Dino Nuggies.
Dino Nuggies. Whatever.
Okay.
Made from like
who knows
bones.
What. But Jamie, actually, that's a great point. And when we talk about overscheduling, my question for you is what are we teaching kids, right? Because it really comes down to us as parents.
Yeah.
And oftentimes in my research, there's honestly a fear of parents of keeping up with other parents. And there's that societal pressure of, whoa, you put boundaries on your kids? And like, or you don't?
Yeah.
And it's like...
The school thing is huge.
The MacBooks or what do they call the Chromebooks?
Even how, especially in the church community, like the three big ones are public, Christian school, or homeschool.
Yep.
And I just stay out of the conversation completely because it's so emotional and passionate for people. And that's exactly why. Instead of just being comfortable with your decision, you have to like look around and be like, well, you should be like me, or because it's validating me. And parents, because we're just older teenagers.
We really are.
That's all we are.
We really are.
And so especially if there's trauma, which there is, or you didn't have great role models at home, and now you're trying to figure out how to have a teenager, and you didn't have good parents yourself. And even if you did, it's hard, but it's at least you're like more secure when you had an upbringing. So now we as parents, every generation, like mine, I'm a Gen X, so we probably our parents. There's probably a good mix, but there's probably a little bit more oversight. Probably would have been a good idea. Yeah, we're so proud of the fact that parents didn't know where I was. It's probably why.
Now my generation's doing late overs instead of sleepovers,
which I think is good.
Actually, I'm kind of for it.
Yeah,
especially since I have two girls.
I mean, there's a reason why everybody my age, like the vast majority, especially of females, were sexually molested. I mean, it's majority.
It's brutal.
And so, at some certain point, like, we probably should know where our kids are.
Yeah.
And we should probably know who they're with.
Yep.
Right? Like, so I think there was some good when the next generation of parents said, I went through too much crap. But then it just went the other way. And so it's like a constant readjustment. And I've said to Nathan, who's my son, and he has agreed, it's like, you guys are probably going to be the ones, your generation, you're going to have to, we're not going to be able to do it for you. We screwed it up.
Yep.
You are going to have to kind of take that cat and maybe not put it back in the bag when it comes to online activity, but to like kind of reformulate new ideas. And I think there's always circular, and it'll happen.
Or pendulums
people
even.
exactly.
Yeah.
People will rebel against the over scheduling, and then they'll probably under schedule again, and then until
nothing new under the sun, man.
So I think really the biggest thing from our standpoint is what is if you're a family that wants to follow Christ.
Yeah.
Like there's two things. Even if you're not, like what do you really want for your kids? And a healthy balance in anything for anybody is always good, right? It's okay to eat an ice cream sundae. Eating them for supper every night, you're gonna die, right?
Yes.
It's okay to have a glass of wine. 7, not good. Like so, everything there is healthy, like sports or activities. These are good things. I did them. You did them, and yet. Is it balanced correctly?
Yeah.
Right. And then for the Christian family, where is Christ fitting in all of this? Is he a priority? And it comes down to if he's a priority for you. Like that's honestly, it isn't even about like you yelling at them. You need to read your Bible. It's about whether they see you doing it.
Yeah.
And living it. And when you don't, owning up to it.
Yeah.
And then they're going to learn that.
Yep.
And it's a priority. Jesus is a priority. Period.
Well, it's even the conversations that I have with parents, right? When you're setting your schedule, right? What do you when you look at a week? What's the first thing on the calendar?
Yeah.
Right? Because that's gonna be the thing that you build your entire week around.
Yeah.
And so as parents, right, when we build out our teenagers and our kids' schedules, what's the first non-negotiable? And then what's the one after that? And then prioritizing. Right? And yeah, exactly. If we claim Christ and yet we aren't, but then we were saying, oh, you don't have to go to church. Oh, you don't have to go to youth group, right?
And our church we have options Saturday, Sunday.
So many.
Not most churches don't have many.
I mean, again, again, fun part of too about our church, right, is we have a young adult ministry for our maybe 2 underscheduled or overscheduled young adults, but right, but we've got tons of stuff in the summer for students too. Yeah, probably a bit too much. I probably go into the overscheduling realm of youth ministry.
Well, no, I think, I really appreciate...
But I just provide options.
I appreciate how you, if at first it looks a little backwards, you almost schedule more in the summer.
I do. I schedule a lot more in the summer.
But we had talked about this, and you said it's because a lot of times, especially the younger, obviously they get working and busier, but they don't have anything going on.
Yeah.
Like even if they do play a lot of times the summer depends. There's training. If there isn't a lot going on, it depends. I mean, some of the older and really involved club teams are playing, but most of the kids don't have as much to do. So you're like, hey, let's take advantage of that rather than kill them during the year when they're doing all this other stuff. Yeah, and I think that's good. You're taking advantage of that.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah,
relational when they don't.
But I like what you said. Like parents look at it, like plan it out, and say, okay. Instead of just like perfect line that we use all the time, a yes to something is a no to something else. You can't do everything. And so if I say yes to this, and this, it comes down to trust God.
Yeah.
I'm not saying your kid shouldn't play club soccer or your kid shouldn't do, but look at it and say, all right, are we giving him or her rest? Yep. Are we spending time as a family? Are we able to be quiet and just live without having this like, oh my gosh, guys, throw the Pop-Tart in your face and get to practice? And are we trusting God that if he's a professional athlete, if she's a D1 player, it's going to happen? Like if you didn't play that one club team, you're like we said, most of it, yes, you do need to work hard and work out. Most of it's God-given ability. Yeah. And it's just it's just the way it is,
Yeah, and I was looking at some kind of barometers too for is your kid overscheduled, right? And one of that is colloquially, are you letting your kid be a teenager?
Yeah.
Right? Are you letting them have downtime?
Yeah.
Are you letting them have enough rest? By the way, teenagers need 9 to 10 hours of sleep a night.
Yeah, they're not getting that.
They aren't.
No.
7.6% of teenagers are getting the rest that they need. Are we surprised that there is an abundance of anxiety and exhaustion amongst teenagers? Right? And
adults too. Like, I always boggles my mind how I mean, you've been battling that having a baby, but even before that, you battle sleep issues. Oh, sure. But it's important to you to figure it out because it should be, because we think about health, we think about eating, and I've so many adults I meet and they're like, yeah, I don't really sleep well. And I'm like, that is one of the key things in your life. You've got to figure that out. If you do need to take something, take it, because like, I don't take stuff. Well, okay, but you're going to be exhausted and it's going to take years off your life.
I took sleep medication for 4 years.
You have a real disorder.
Yeah, real bad.
You have a lot of disorders.
There's a lot going on here.
Just listen to Josh for 5 seconds. What's going on in his mind? Wonder why he ain't sleeping.
So true.
But back to the teenagers. I mean, I don't like that. What it comes down to is like the 9 p.m. rule or whatever it is. Even if you're not in bed snoring, like read a friggin' book.
Wait, books exist still?
They do, and they're so calming to your mind. Like I do that every night.
Yeah.
Even sometimes I'm exhausted, I need to read for like 2 minutes. And
yeah.
I'm like, all right, I'm done.
Yeah. I always saw Kindles in your office, and so I bought a Kindle.
Yeah.
And that's actually when my sleep got even better too.
Yeah. You can turn the lights off.
Yep. Turn the light off with the Kindle. Yeah. Oh man, I conk out constantly.
And those are powerful things. You can roll around on them. You're like, where's my Kindle? It's under my mattress.
Yeah.
But like and it's like I even think my daughter definitely still reads, not a ton, but she definitely still reads. Nathan is a great reader, but he just stopped.
Yep.
And it's like I would talk to him and I would try to encourage it, but it's like at a certain point as a parent, you're like, all right, well, you have to make choices.
Yeah.
And he reads more now than he did, but it's like it's so good for you. But regardless, if you don't read, it's like turn the YouTube off.
Got to get those screens off because it's one of the most under talked about. We talk about physical time busyness, but we do not let our brains rest.
Yeah.
And that starts with us as parents.
Yeah.
Are our kids seeing us not on our phones? Are our kids seeing us carve out intentional times of just stillness, of being still? One thing that we talk about too with our daughter, she's 5. She's like, I'm bored. And I say, good. We aren't letting our teenagers be bored.
Yeah. Yeah,
and boredom spurns
because
creativity.
Aren't allowing themselves.
If we're not allowing ourselves to be bored, if we're constantly stimulating ourselves, then we're just pushing. We're just creating this mental monster, if you will, that we're just passing on to our teenagers. So, again, not saying technology is bad and just we need to be, what's that phrase? That Luddites, I believe, is the phrase. Luddites, and go back to dumb phones, if you will.
Well, I think that's where people are watching this as parents, especially if you have younger kids who are going to be in the teenage. But even if they're like to say, you know what, forget about what everyone else is doing. What's right for my child?
Yep.
What's right for our family? And are we having enough time just around dinner and no devices, just laughing
and
picking on each other
and
even yelling at each other? It's all part of life.
But when it comes to scheduling, are we scheduling nothingness?
Right.
Like, are we actually
called Sabbath?
I've taught on that lesson.
Yeah. In the Bible, it's a Sabbath principle.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to us as adults. We're pretty terrible at it.
Mm-hmm.
In general, there's some that are great, but it has to be diligent. It has to be something that you value, and then your kids will value, and then you value it in them. You're not going to be perfect, but man, it's like a whole week will go by. You're like, what? I didn't even stop and think.
That was me last month, but maybe it was because of an infant.
Yeah, you had a baby. So. There's no Sabbath.
There's no Sabbath.
So you got to rest up beforehand.
With an infant.
You got to create the reservoir.
Thank God for playoff basketball.
Yeah, you need mindless stuff, but it really comes down. Like I said, the problem with busyness is primarily the parents, grandparents, adult culture, and then it's a money thing. So, like anything else, if you're going to do it and pay me for it, I'm going to create a business.
Yep.
And you can't blame these people, but they're all enticing you. Oh, hey, join my blah, blah, blah.
And this almost seems like there's a pay-to-win structure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think it's, talking to parents at some of the higher level, I don't really think it matters. I think some of them do it because they think they need to. I think some personal, you could hire like a personal trainer like in the summer if you had the money and work. I mean, your skills will get better, but in the end, the best kids are the best kids, and even just working on their own,
Yeah.
they're fine. Depending on the sport, obviously. Like if you're a hockey player, you need to find a rink, and there's only so
Hockey gear is so expensive
Yeah.
too, and smelly.
Well, kids are smelly.
Yeah,
so.
that's very true. invest in deodorant.
Hockey and gymnastics, those are two
Yep,
things
two
I
very,
said I'm
very.
never going to
Yep.
do.
Mhm.
And again, they're great. I'm not saying you shouldn't do them, but for me personally, I was like, I don't want to be doing that. Like, it seems a lot.
But it's interesting too. You mentioned the investment, right? The money aspect of
another
it, where we put tons of money into youth sports, and then we look at the church and we're like, well, what? Well, the church asking for my money. But imagine with me for a second if you looked at the role the church plays versus the role these pay to play leagues play, right? When the church is saying, hey, well, we're asking, that you would partner with us financially. The things we're giving back to your kid is a place to be a teenager.
Yeah.
We're going to take care of them. We're going to coach them. We're going to encourage them. We're going to build them up. Not to say that sports don't do those things. There are great coaches out there who are doing that.
Yep.
However, we're doing it in a way really where it's far more restful and relaxing and less taxing on them.
And it's eternal goals.
And it is eternal goals.
But you're right. It's not like you shouldn't put money, but it's like if you're like you're asking for me, but I'm willing to spend $5,000. I'm sure it's even more. I don't even really.
I don't know. Yeah.
Some of these.
I'm scared.
I've talked to parents.
I'm scared to see how much it is.
Yeah, and it's like I'm willing to pay that so my kid can get trained to play soccer or hockey, but you're asking me for money. It's like, what if we wouldn't do this, but what if we asked you for $2,000 to help train up your kids all year? It was like, no way.
Yeah.
Most people would say that. And you're right. It's a good, well, why are you saying that? And I'm not, again, saying we're going to do that. That's not the way the church operates, and we wouldn't want to because there'd be plenty of kids who can't afford that.
Sure.
And we want to train them up and outreach and all that. But if you were presented with that with a question, as a rhetorical question, like you're willing to put $5,000 into a club team, but then we say, hey, how about you pay us $2,000 and we'll meet with your kids like once or twice a week. We'll disciple them. We'll do great events, a lot of fun stuff. Like, I mean, don't you just do that for free?
Yeah.
And it's like all your money talks, what your values are, where your priorities are. And we get so excited about our kids achieving. We all do. And there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. I love to see my kids achieve and do well and win. And even if they lose, to be able to see the lessons taught in that. And so there is really good value in it. But man, it's just like, you got to know and really pray hard about where's the balance.
Yeah.
And where is it just too much?
Yep.
And you're putting way too much on them, So, yeah, I don't know.
So, in closing, give us one or two big picture, if you want to get practical, solutions to the busyness, the overexhaustion, overscheduling that you see of today's teenagers.
Well, I think it's more of a recap of some of the things we've already brought up. I say it falls with the parents, both, but especially dad. Now, if you're not a Christian, then it might have different values than we do.
Yep.
But I still think you should seriously consider what it's doing to your kids, regardless of whether or not you want them to follow Christ, right? We hope you do, but even if you're like, that's not important to me, but do you really think 70 hours a week of basketball is appropriate? But as Christian parents, if that's us, right, is especially dads, is to really take the steering wheel of this and be willing to take the shots of people going, you don't do this, and then maybe your wife is like, oh, but because sometimes our wives can get into that, like, oh, but our kid, because they love their kids so much. And we do too, but we have to be the ones that step out and say, I love them enough to say no.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. We're not doing another thing. We're not, right? We're like, so then steer the ship. So then like really pray about and talk about, if you're married, what's the best thing for our kids, and plan it out and say, well, if we're going to let them do these things, that's fine. But are they getting rest? And are they actually able to grow in Christ?
Well, and it's like Luke says, right? Count the costs.
Yeah.
When we're building our barns and our silos, right? What is it going to take time-wise on our family? What's it going to take rest-wise on our family? Are we compromising our deeply held belief that Christ is center, and not just that belief, but the praxis of that, right?
And I can
constantly coming back to that.
I can speak from now. I have a son who's 21 and a daughter who's 18, so they're both out.
Yep.
Like Chris will be a teenager for another year, but she's going off to college, and so those kind of like years we're talking about are done very recently, though. Yep. So it's not just them, but I know a lot of their friends. I know a lot of, because of being a parent, and I can just tell parents none of it really matters. Like they're not, hardly any of them are still playing that sport or doing that thing. They might still pursue it. Some of them, a few kids are really good, might play like D3 college, with a very,
I went D3.
Yeah. With a very few exceptions.
And by the way, my academic scholarship was far more than my athletic scholarship.
I'm sure it's D3.
Yeah.
They don't really have scholarships.
Yeah, I didn't know.
They have pretend academic ones that they give you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. You're a great runner, and so we'll just give you an academic scholarship.
But I've also seen, and we've touched on this a little bit, but this is Gen Z, which is now this Alpha coming up.
Gen Alpha. Yep, we're talking about that with Lauren tomorrow.
But Z is teenagers and up, and young adults now too. They're all anxious.
Yeah.
And we have to, why? And I think there's a few reasons. I think the busyness is a big factor. Yep. We have overprogrammed them. And the connectivity is probably the factor. Mm-hmm. They never put it down. But it's also the connectivity helps them to see world events as scary and at their doorstep, which they might have been scary at our doorstep in the 80s, but I had no idea.
Yep. Yep.
My parents were watching the boring news. We're watching Tom Brokaw, and I'm like, this looks boring. I'm out. I wasn't looking at podcasters screaming about how Trump is deranged and Biden's an old, it's just none of it mattered. Politics was so boring. And now it's so they're scared because of the connectivity.
Yeah.
But it's also, as we go further and further from God, there's so many families that are broken and trauma. And so now they're dealing with all that. So you just throw that all into a big ball. And of course, everybody's anxious, And so some of the things we're talking about are helping combat that naturally. It doesn't mean someone might not need a med. It just means, are we doing everything we can to give them a time to breathe and play and rest? And as my kids got a little bit older, it's just the things that I thought were so important. Now it's are they following Jesus? Yeah, I want them out of my house at some point. Right? And it would be good for them too, and they will be. But it's so what? Oh, they have the greatest career. Oh, okay, good for you. I'm glad. I want them to be happy. I want them to be successful, but not at the cost. Of their losing their mind and losing their faith, or just not having it be important.
Yeah,
and so it comes down to the parents being willing to say no, especially dads, and then the devices, you've got to find filters. You got to get help with that. We can help you with that. Absolutely. To figure that out, we have people who can easily show you how to set that up. And we go, oh, my kid's fine. Even if they're fine, they're not fine. I mean, we should have filters.
Everybody should.
Yeah. Time filters and everything.
Yep.
So I think, and it starts really with, especially the Christian family, praying about it, really asking God.
Yep.
Who were you trying to please?
Yeah.
And who are you trusting?
Yep.
Don't try to please everybody else.
I think to a degree, you're right. The overscheduling is us trying to control.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And we want, it really is hard. We love our kids, so we don't want to say no. And we love our kids, so we want to see them be the best.
Yep.
But what I'm saying at the other end of it is already looking at it, it's whether or not they were the best soccer player really didn't matter.
Yeah.
Nobody cares at 21, 22. It's over.
Yeah.
I had my glory days, pretty good basketball and soccer player, and we had some good teams, and I think about them once in a while, but they don't matter. Yep. They don't matter.
Yeah, nobody asks me about my cross-country career anymore.
Nobody cares about cross-country to begin with, except for cross-country people.
That's fair.
You run a lot. Have fun with that.
That's fair. But I guess, and again, as we finish here, I'm just reminded of all of this. I think of one of my favorite Psalms, Psalm 46, verse 10. To be still.
Yeah.
And know that I am God, right? And that be stillness, especially for us as parents.
He is God.
Be still and know that I am.
Well, yeah, he's telling you to do it. Be still and know that I am God. Just the way you
I'm
said
not
it. Made it sound like you're like, be still and know that I am God.
I am, yeah. I'm a really, really bad God.
That's what you need to do. Remember, you're God.
Yeah.
No, the opposite.
Lowercase g.
Completely opposite.
Yes. But that be still can also just be loosen your grip.
Yeah.
Stop trying to control. Stop trying to schedule everything and plan for your kid, and instead relinquish that over to God, a good God who sees, who knows, who loves, and trust him with that result.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you for listening. And Jamie, thanks for coming and hanging out for a while.
Anytime.
And Steve behind the door, we're grateful for you too. God bless y'all.
See you.